And we should be recording. We are. So let's let folks in.
Welcome to those of you joining. We're just giving it a couple of minutes for folks to get into the Zoom call and get their mics connected so that they can hear our audio. Thank you for being with us. And we will go ahead and get started so that we can spend as much time as we can in our agenda. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Sarah Ogletree, and I am the program coordinator at North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light in CIPL, and it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you tonight to this important conversation. First, I just want to offer a few logistics. This meeting is being recorded and will be sent along with all of the resources that we place in the chat throughout the conversation in a follow-up email to all of you who have registered for this call. We will also be posting the recording of this event on YouTube, so please know that there will be ample opportunity for you to share this information with your broader networks. We also ask that you please utilize the chat box to add your questions to the speakers as those questions arise. So please pop your questions into the chat box. I will be collecting those questions to make sure that you get an answer and that you are informed in the ways that you need to be. We will make note of those questions in the chat and strive to get to them before our time is up this evening. Additionally, just to ground us as we welcome you to this preparation training for the March 16th NC Utility Commission hearing, we want to take a moment to pause and acknowledge that here in North Carolina, as in every part of our country, we are on Indigenous land. Our state is home to the highest Indigenous population east of Oklahoma, and acknowledging that the land we reside within and depend upon is Indigenous land is one of the ways that we seek to orient ourselves in this work and do the work of justice in our lives. Today, we honor each tribe, their ancestral land, and their presence in North Carolina today. We also name our collective commitment to the work of holistic and expansive justice. I will uplift that where I live in Western North Carolina, I am on the land of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indian, and I invite you to place in the chat the name of the people whose land you rely upon now. If you do not know, that is also an invitation to learn. I look forward to working together to ensure a livable and just future, and I will now hand the call over to Kathy Buckley as we strive to do just that.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and good evening, and thanks for coming, folks. And I am the director of statewide organizing for the North Carolina Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. I'm speaking from the occupied land of the Lumbee. And in honor of International Women's Day, I'd like to just give you a short quote from a woman on the international scene whom I respect greatly, Arundhati Roy of India, who wrote, "Another world is not only possible, but she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." So I and my colleagues tonight will speak to all the items on the Duke Energy Report Card. And before getting into that, I'm going to start with some tips on testifying. My first tip is to register. The registration deadline to testify at the public hearing on the integrated resource plans. And by the way, will explain shortly what an integrated resource plan is. The deadline to register is this Thursday at 5 p.m. And in the chat, you will see how you can register. You can actually register during this meeting. It only takes a second. And I'm just going to address two things that might be keeping you from registering. One of them is that you're not an expert. Well, this is specifically called a public hearing for non-expert testimony. So you're all set. The other thing may be that you have not read the integrated resource plans of the utilities. Well, hardly anyone has. And I did read the Duke Carolina's plan, and I can assure you with a clear conscience not to read it. There are plenty of reports that you can read that give the essence of these plans. And those reports are available on the resources page of the report card, website. Now, as far as testifying, the only thing you need to do is relax and speak from the heart. Really talk about what it is that's important to you. You can include statistics if you want to, but there's no need to. The upper limit for testifying is 5 minutes, but that's the upper limit. You can talk for 40 seconds and you can speak from whatever perspective you want. You can speak as a parent, as a young person looking forward to decades on a beautiful planet. And one other thing to consider is that the time limit may change, because right now, as of this afternoon, 71 people have registered to testify. And let's try to double that by Thursday at 5 o'clock. But they may decide to shorten our maximum time to say 2 or 3 minutes. So be prepared to have the most important things you want to say. If you are going to be going, longer than than 2 minutes, that you can take care of that. Now, one other thing I'm going to suggest that you consider is asking the commissioners. Oh, and by the way, thank them for holding the hearing, and at the end, thank them for considering your comments. You might want to ask them to hold an evidentiary hearing as an evidence. Evidentiary is where the experts who do read the IRPs and do look at all the models and all of the the background reports, they would get to cross-examine Duke Energy staff and say things like, why did you do this? And why didn't you consider this? And that's a very critical thing. So if a lot of us ask for that, the commissioners might be more apt to grant it. They have been asked to hold one already. Now I will turn it over to Will, who will tell you what is an IRP.
Hi, y'all. Will Harlan. I'm based here in Asheville on the occupied lands of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee as well. And if we could advance the slides, I think we need to advance it too. Yeah, next slide after this. So an IRP, an integrated resource plan, is just a fancy word for an energy plan. And it's a 15-year plan that will basically decide how Duke will generate electricity for the next 15 years. Will it retire all of its coal plants and significantly invest in solar and wind? Or will it keep burning coal and build a lot more fracked gas plants? Well, this energy plan presents 6 scenarios, but its base case proposes to build up to 13 more fracked gas plants across the state. So Duke is going all in on fracked gas rather than investing in renewables. And so this public hearing is the only opportunity for customers like you to have a voice in where your electricity comes from. So Duke is presenting this plan to the North Carolina Utilities Commission. It's a 7-member board that decides whether to approve Duke's energy plan or to send them back to the drawing board to fix it. And so next Tuesday, all 7 of those commissioners will be listening to you. Next slide. So fortunately, the Duke Energy Report Card will enable you to speak thoughtfully at this hearing. It essentially distills the plan into 10 metrics that we've evaluated the plan on. And we'll be going through these metrics tonight so you have an idea of what the report and what the plan really contains. Next slide. So if you're a Duke customer, 41% of your energy comes from fossil fuels. That's coal and fracked gas. Renewables like solar and wind make up less than 6% of Duke's generation currently. 15 years from now, according to Duke's plan, renewables will only increase by 8%. So instead of solar and wind, Duke's base case invests us heavily in fracked gas. As I mentioned, they're planning to build up to 13 new fracked gas plants that will lock us into decades more fossil fuels, pipelines, spills, pollution. Duke has the most fracked gas plants planned of any utility in the country and the smallest percentage of renewables of any utility in the country. Next slide, please. So the Duke report card was created to help everyday folks understand what Duke is proposing in their plan. And as we mentioned, there's 10 metrics. The first metric we're going to talk about tonight is their commitment to retiring coal plants. Aging, dirty, expensive coal plants. Duke has the largest coal fleet in the country. Its coal plants are some of the oldest, dirtiest, and most expensive in the nation as well. And so in its base case scenario, Duke is proposing burning coal until 2049. Burning coal is the dirtiest and most expensive way to produce energy. Customers like you have already paid over $3 billion extra on your bills to prop up these aging coal plants. And now Duke wants you to keep footing the bill for these dirty plants for the next 3 decades. So that's one reason why it gets this very poor grade. Fortunately, Duke was also required to include a scenario in the plan that retires all of its coal plants by the end of this decade. North Carolina must be coal-free by 2030 if we want to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis and also end the toxic air and water pollution from these coal plants. So retiring all of Duke's coal plants will save money and lives. Kathy?
After I unmute myself, I'm going to talk about getting real with climate goals. I'm going to just talk about a few things that's in this plan that indicates they're not really serious about what needs to be done. Now, both Duke Energy and Dominion Energy, and there are 3. Most of our energy comes from Duke Energy, 2 companies, Duke Carolinas, Duke Progress. Dominion Energy, which is primarily in Virginia, also serves Northeast North Carolina. They're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, the Biden-Harris plan is to have our power sector emissions eliminated by 2035. So there's a 15-year difference right there. In those IRPs, there's only incremental progress between now and 2050. We really have to be racing towards 2030. If we want to stroll, we should save that for the 2040s. And it's the opposite in these IRPs. Now, one of those 6 pathways that they present, for example, is a base case with a price on carbon that's externally set by the government or some way that we actually increase the price on fossil fuels. They put a price of $5 a ton starting in 2023, and they increase it by $7 a ton every year thereafter. But they'd still be under $200 a ton by 2050. And if you look at the studies today, the real cost is on the order of $400 a ton now. So they're not even going to be halfway to reality by 2050. And there's no pathway that gets to zero emissions as soon as possible for least cost. There's a couple that one is a high wind scenario and one is a high nuclear scenario. But there's no pathway, there's A, B, C, D, F, but there's no G, which would be as much wind as possible, as much solar as possible at least cost. And that's what we need in this plan. And then, I think the most troubling thing for me is there's no sense of the excitement of the challenge. And when you think about it, it's kind of crazy to be depending on a company like Duke Energy to sprint us towards a new world. When you look at innovation, it's done by companies that are young, they're nimble, they haven't been here long, and they're just doing new things. And if you think about, say IBM got a monopoly on computers way back when, and they still had it, and say AT&T still had a monopoly on telephones. We would not have these things in our pockets that are much, much more powerful than all the computers that put a man on the moon in 1969. We'd be making progress, but we wouldn't be sprinting the way we need to. And of course, with climate change, it's more critical than ever that we do that. And it's tragically ironic that in the country that is really the world capital of capitalism, we are being strangled by a lack of competition. A next item on the report card is affordability and equal access. Now, 1.25 million North Carolina households cannot afford their electricity bills. And as of last November, about a fifth of all customers were behind, owing $120 million. And as you can see, these plans that Duke Energy has come up with are not decreasing our bills, but increasing them. And tragically, Duke has shut off power to 17,000 households. So just take a second and imagine what it would be like to not have electricity, especially in a very cold day or a very hot day. But even without that, your refrigerator no longer works. And imagine you've got 3 kids at home, and it's just wrong. And it's an issue that's only mentioned in passing in the IRPs. And I'm just going to touch briefly on 2 possible remedies. One is that your energy bill doesn't start at 0 every year. It starts at $14, and that $14 covers all of the infrastructure of our electrical grid. But if you're working for a minimum wage, after deductions and everything, you gotta work a few hours a month just to pay for not getting any electricity yet. And if you're the Duke Energy CEO, you're going to have to work for about 5 or 6 seconds to get that money. So it's a very regressive charge, and we need to get that from some other source. And it also doesn't encourage conservation. Now, another way for low-income customers to get a break on their electricity bills is through community solar. That's if you have solar panels in your house, it's because you can afford them and you own your roof. And low-income folks primarily are going to be renters, so they don't own their roofs, and they really can't afford the upfront costs. With community solar, you put in the system, and it's shared by lots of folks. So everybody gets all of those. All those people get the benefit of offsetting the price of their electricity. And it's also good for all of us because that allows even more solar panels to be built in North Carolina. So we need to really open up that possibility. And the next item on the report card is energy efficiency. And you can see that they're actually going backwards in energy efficiency. The last IRP and these integrated resource plans are done every 2 years, was actually doing better on energy efficiency. And again, they're really not taking global warming or global heating too seriously. And what's the most efficient, effective way to decrease carbon emissions from the production of electricity? It's to not use electricity in the first place. That would mean efficiency, conservation, and there's another thing called peak demand, where a really hot day in August or a really cold day in January, everybody is heating or everybody's cooling. To be able to figure out ways to shave off those peaks, so we not only use less electricity, but we don't have to have more plants being built to handle those really high demand times. And that's something that Sally is now going to explore some more.
Thanks, Kathy, and everybody. I'm Sally Robertson. I'm policy coordinator at NC Warren. What we were looking for in this IRP was no new gas infrastructure being built. Unfortunately, what we got was, in 5 of Duke's 6 scenarios, a massive build out of new gas burning power plants. They had one scenario called the no new gas scenario, which was just stacked against us. They had it being much more expensive than the others. They kept coal running longer. They had us installing a bunch of small nuclear reactors. So it wasn't a plan that we could support either. The gas in Duke's plan is a climate disaster. If you've followed NC Warren's work at all, you know that we have spent a lot of time complaining about the methane leakage from the gas industry. That's not something that's even included when Duke looks at its emissions because it's not happening on Duke property. But even if you ignore the methane, which is hard for me to say, but if you ignore the methane and you just look at the carbon dioxide that comes out of Duke's power plants, it makes everybody's climate goals impossible to reach. So even Duke's own climate goals can't be reached with the amount of gas that they're talking about building and when they're talking about building it. Kathy mentioned the Biden-Harris plan, and there's a new bill in the House that also calls for getting all carbon emissions out of the electricity sector by 2035. We'll take a look at this chart. 2035, Duke's building a bunch of gas, building new gas in the year that Biden says we need to be emitting zero from the electricity sector. So not only is it a bad way to generate electricity, it's not needed. There are a lot of reports being filed right now with the Utilities Commission by the different expert interveners, and they're all saying we can get there with solar and storage. We can get there with energy efficiency. We can get there with wind. So you don't need gas to provide power reliably to North Carolina or South Carolina, if we have any South Carolinians on this call. But Duke is creating an argument with its IRP that it does need gas. And we've been looking at some ways that it's kind of fudging the numbers. It underestimates the cost to build new gas plants. It overestimates the cost to install solar and storage. And it also is underreporting the amount of excess power it has available at times of peak demand. So when there's a polar vortex, they're saying that they have, they're so close to the margin, they have practically no power left. So we have to build more so that we have a better reserve, a better cushion. And as we look at the numbers, we're finding that that's not at all true, that there are lots of power plants that aren't even being used at those peak times. If you put the correct numbers in there, gas is more expensive than the alternatives. So the commission is charged with finding the least cost way of producing electricity, and gas is not it, but Duke still is arguing that it is. So why would Duke do this? Why would they propose these things, propose building these plants at a ridiculous time in our climate history when they're more expensive than the alternative? The reason is that if they can get them built, they can get us to pay for them, even if they have to be retired because of climate regulations or because they become uneconomic compared to solar and storage. So if they can get them built, we're going to be stuck paying for them. There was a report that concluded that bill could be as much as $4.8 billion in that customers would be stuck paying for these stranded assets. So even if they're not being used. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit too about our renewable energy part of the report card. We gave them a D on this, which I argued for an F, but there are some feelings that Duke has done some solar programs that have worked, and they will continually brag about North Carolina being second in the nation. Well, it slipped thanks to them. Now it's third in the nation for solar. So we do have some solar here, but if you look at what Duke plans, I think Will mentioned earlier, they've got 5% renewables, 6 including hydropower in 2021. In 2035, they're only going to be 15%. And the national average last year was 19.8. So their big ambition for 2035 is to be not quite to where the rest of the country is now. So it's pretty pitiful. And there's numbers in here about studies that are showing, even a study that Duke ordered that shows that much more than that is possible. I mentioned that they're not accurately pricing storage resources. Storage is going to be essential going forward because if we're going to have that amount of renewables on the grid, solar that doesn't produce energy at night, you need to have storage to back it up so you have power around the clock. So it's really imperative that they have the right numbers for storage and that they model it properly. But they're using overestimating the cost of storage, and they're not modeling efficient combinations of solar and storage. So some of the reports that are going into the commission now are showing that. And it's just, aside from the climate, aside from the cost to customers, renewables create more jobs. and and create no local air pollution and water pollution, no coal ash residue. So it's just obviously the right way to go, and we just have to get the commission to see that, to make Duke choose a better pathway forward. So that's what I had, and I'm going to pass it over to John. John, who's on mute.
Oh, I'm very sorry about that. I used half my time. Good evening. I'm John Gertner, a consultant on environment and energy and lead author of recent review of Duke Energy's climate strategy. My first topic is grid modernization. I'm not going to use this particular slide, although I think it's a very good one because I have a more detailed slide. So if you could advance it, please, I'd appreciate it. So first you might ask, what is the grid? Well, between the power plants that generate the electricity and the customers and the distributed resources on the other side is a huge infrastructure. It's made up of a high voltage transmission system, a medium voltage distribution system, many transformers, substations, control systems, protective systems, diagnostics and analytics, software, and that everything in between the power plants and the customers is the grid. And you might ask, well, why do we care about the grid for climate? Well, because a modern smart grid should enhance Duke's climate strategy if it's well done. And I've put together 5 bullets on this slide that you can read at your leisure, but I'll summarize them by saying a modern smart grid will enable more renewable energy to be possible on the grid. It will enable more effective energy efficiency programs. It'll enable cheaper electricity. It'll provide resilience to climate change effects like storms. And it'll require that there be less new generation on the system. And all this is because of the efficiency with which we're able to do things if we have a smart modern grid. And so Duke has programs, we acknowledge that, to improve the grid, but there's very little detail in the IRP, and there's very little detail available to us as stakeholders anywhere on what their plans are and what the effects of those plans will be. And a lot of that is because that grid information is very business sensitive to them, and we can understand some of that. But when we did our review, we made a strong recommendation that Duke must be more transparent and tell us more how this is going to, and convince us that these changes are being used to optimally move toward a clean environment. And we as stakeholders need to be assured that the benefits above will be realized. So my next topic, so I'd move to the next slide, please. And in fact, 2 slides ahead, if you would. The next topic is advanced generation technology. Doesn't have that name on the slide, but I'll explain that in a moment. Many people contend that renewable energy and energy efficiency can achieve carbon emission reductions through 2050 effectively. Duke contends that other advanced technologies are necessary. They call these advanced technologies ZELFers. Next slide, please. Some people call them imaginary technologies. Duke calls them ZELFers. A ZELFer is a zero emitting load following resource. Zero emitting is easy. That means there's no carbon comes from it. That's great. Load following means that the device has to be capable of providing the proper power, voltage, frequency, phase, everything to keep the grid stable. And Duke contends there are no technologies that are both clean and load following that are available to them now, and they have to be developed and then implemented later. Duke provides some of those tells us what they think some of those technologies are, and I've included them under the first bullet. The first one is advanced nuclear technologies that's specifically engineered to have these capabilities. Another one is carbon capture and storage of carbon dioxide, and then traditional fossil generation would be used, but it would be carbon free in this ideal world. Then long-term storage is a Zelfer, and that's having a capability well beyond what the current lithium-ion batteries can provide. They would be innovative sources of storage. And finally, the use of hydrogen, where renewables would make the hydrogen. So it would be carbon-free, and then it would be stored as hydrogen until it's needed and converted back to electricity. These are the Zelfers that Duke is proposing. But in order to be effective, these Zelfers will have to reach a very high bar. First of all, they'll have to be demonstrated to be technology ready when we need them. They'll have to be low enough in cost to be feasible. They'll have to have all the policy and legal barriers removed that currently may exist. And finally, they'll have to be implementable in a very timely fashion. If any of these criteria aren't met, they won't satisfy their climate goal with these Zelfers. So we have to be very careful of that. Now, I've included in this slide a table that I've drawn. It's taken from the IRP. It's much prettier in the IRP, but if it says how Zelfers are used in each of the 6 Duke cases in the IRP. And you'll notice that in A, B, and C, and where these are the first 3 that we're not crazy about because they don't give us very good carbon emission reduction, but they don't require any Zelfers. They're lower tech approaches. The D and E options, which are the ones that Kathy told you they do meet our higher standard of 70% carbon removal. They do require Zelfers, and you'll see by the readiness on the right-hand side that number 2 and 3 that they're nowhere near ready. And so there's quite a challenge to get these Zelfers ready. And not only that, but Duke tells us that between 2035 and 2050, which is not addressed by the IRP, but is part of our climate strategy, that Zelfers will be required no matter what strategy Duke approaches. They are saying they need the Zelfers. So because of that, our review committee, we told Duke they need to be very assertive to support with resources and leadership the development of Zelfer technologies that they propose. And they need to start doing it now so that we'll be able to see whether these are achievable, and it gives them the maximum likelihood of having success. And we also suggested that they needed a scenario in their planning which would maximize renewables and efficiencies in case these Zelfers don't come through, that we are not left with an unachievable climate goal. So that's the story on Zelfers and advanced technology. So Joel, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, John. 1 second. So markets, when designed right, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm sorry. I'm Joel Porter. I'm the policy manager with Clean Air Carolina. And I worked with John on the report that he was mentioning on Duke Energy's climate goals, the climate review group report that I posted in the chat if folks haven't seen it. So market competition. Markets, when designed right, can be a reflection of the values that you want it to have. The recent events in Texas are a prime example of the extreme effects of this. So the state wanted the free market to operate with little regulation, and a result of that was sky-high power bills and essentially grid failure in the face of a changing climate. It operated the way that the state wanted it to operate. It wasn't a reflection of the values that North Carolina has, which is primarily based on affordability. But we have an opportunity to build a market that values sustainability, resiliency, and affordability. Unfortunately, this IRP in its current form is not one that adequately reflects those values. So in the process of instructing Duke Energy's development of the IRP, the NCUC issued a rule which requires the utility to include specific features, specific values to be used in developing its analysis that ensures least cost operation. Duke's interpretation of that rule was an IRP that's essentially flawed. It has a flawed base case and a flawed suite of scenarios to lower carbon emissions. And I think that's kind of been said several times here today. But even staying within the perimeters that the NCUC laid out for developing the IRP, Duke Energy could have gone much further to ensure that clean energy resources are added to the grid on a cost competitive basis. That's especially true today now that Congress has extended tax credits that make clean energy resources more than competitive. The models used in the IRP can only assume that 500 megawatts can be added to the grid in a given year. This is despite the fact that in multiple prior years, Duke has interconnected over 700 megawatts of solar within the state, and Duke's own study shows, as Sally was mentioning, that they can add up to 30% more solar and storage. Moreover, outside of what the state mandates under the competitive bidding process, which was set under HB 589 2 years ago, Duke does not allow all source procurement of least cost resources, nor do they allow power purchase agreements. The NCUC can and should make Duke incorporate both. Duke is engaged in discussions with other Southeastern power producers about the potential to create a Southeast Energy Exchange Market, or SEAM. This will expand access to clean energy resources, but it only saves a fraction of what could be saved should we join what other states have done in creating a regional transmission organization, or RTO, that coordinates on grid transmission and maximizes efficiency. The savings, if we were to join an RTO, would be in the billions, the B. So in developing Duke's report card, we gave this section on embracing market competition a D. That's basically because they've done the minimum. They've said that they would join a regional energy market exchange, but it doesn't really do much more than that. They need to embrace market competition. They need to embrace free market climate solutions. And that's something that they say that they purportedly embrace. Their view on effective carbon policy embraces a number of principles, which include cost effectiveness, market-based, equitable. There be provisions for all emitting sectors, environmentally effective, promotes technology development, and is politically sustainable. Excuse me. Can we go to the next slide, please? And that leads me to my final section, which is no lobbying against the public interest. Duke, in saying that they support these principles on effective carbon policy, is not in line with what we've seen they actually advocate for. They lobby for subsidies primarily. They don't lobby for a carbon price. They don't lobby for RGGI. They don't lobby for regulation that would embrace market competition. They basically lobby in their self-interest. They lobby as a company would lobby. Duke Energy is a regulated entity. It is a utility. So by North Carolina law, they cannot use ratepayer money to lobby. They have to use basically investor funds. We have no idea if they do that. They don't keep their books public. They don't keep, one side of the ledger says it's public money, one says it's private. We have no idea how they're spending their money and if they're actually spending money in the public interest. So this section, we gave them a big fat capital F. So thanks very much. And I believe we move on to the Q&A section, correct?
Yes, and I had to unmute myself. So thank you all for all of that information. And thank you also to everyone in the chat who's asked some really wonderful questions. So we're going to try to get to as many of these as we can. And then there are some folks, some of our speakers are willing to stay on after if we don't get to all of our questions. So just know that that is an option. But our first question is it possible for there to be a lot of sign up to the point that Duke will have to offer a second public hearing day? Or is this truly just only one day, only one option?
I can take that one. We actually have 19 organizations signed a letter and sent it to the North Carolina Utility Commission's chair, Charlotte Mitchell, requesting additional hearings because one, they're going to be online so people don't have to drive to Raleigh. And two, there's increasing interest in global warming. We haven't gotten a response yet. The numbers of people who have signed up to testify have been growing pretty steadily. Last week, it was only 36. Like a week ago, it was only 36. And then I got up to 40 something by Friday. Now we're at 71. So keep those cards and letters coming in. And as we add more people, we're going to follow up on that letter and say, please, instead of trying to, cut us down to 2 minutes or have us go till 2 o'clock in the morning, let's have some more hearings.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. So again, a call to register and also spread the word about registering to keep that momentum going. Another question we had, since there are really 2 IRPs for Duke Carolina and Duke Progress, does the report card cover both IRPs or only one?
I'll just say that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the report card took both IRPs into account. Really, Duke Energy Progress's IRP was essentially the exact same as Duke Energy Carolina's IRP. And in fact, in the preamble, they basically say as much.
Okay, thank you. We did have also a request for the link to be dropped for the Duke Energy Progress IRP. So if anyone has that link and they're willing to drop that in the chat, that would be helpful. But thank you, they are basically the same. That's helpful. Another question we had, who is the best role model as a utility that we could reference in the United States for doing things now? Is that just a laughable moment?
I'll throw one out there.
Okay.
In Northern Indiana, NIPSCO, NIPSCO, they share common territory with Duke Energy. Duke also operates in Indiana, but NIPSCO is the exact opposite of going in a much better direction than what Duke is, where Duke is going all in on gas and trying to hold on to coal as long as possible. NIPSCO has completely recalibrated and is all in on renewables. And as a result, they're seeing a lot of growth and support.
Great, thank you. If we have any others that we think of, we can drop those in the chat as well. So another question, does anyone know the cost of solar plus storage? Solar and wind are cheaper when the sun shines and when the wind blows, but we have to include the cost of storage. Does that make a difference in regards to the IRP or to these arguments? Yeah, Sally?
I could give a non-answer to that. I don't know the cost off the top of my head, but I could get back to folks with that. But our consultant that we hired, an engineer named Bill Powers, found that his feeling was that the prices that Duke was using for storage were about twice what they ought to be.
Okay.
Because the price of storage is dropping pretty dramatically, and they were not using, so he argued they should be using a price that would be accurate sort of in the mid period of their 15-year time frame, and they weren't. They were using more like a storage cost from now. So yeah, I don't know absolute prices, but the person who asked the question is absolutely right that they have to be together. The solar and the storage have to be together, so the cost of the storage is an important factor, and it also has to be the right amount of storage to work with the amount of solar you've got. That was another thing that our consultant found, was that they weren't pairing they weren't putting enough storage together with the solar they were proposing.
Yeah, I've seen, so one way to view, and personally, my preferable way to view energy costs is by the levelized cost of energy, the LCOE. And I've seen numbers, and don't take this as gospel, but solar is typically, I believe, seen around $3 per kilowatt hour. And solar plus storage, I think, goes up to about, I want to say as high as 16. So storage still isn't that cheap, but solar itself is very affordable and cost competitive. As I was saying in my presentation, even without subsidies or anything else, all things being equal, solar is very affordable.
And I'll look up some numbers that Sarah can send out when she sends out the follow-up email, that because I think there was Joel, if that was Joel just speaking, I think there was a contract in California that I saw that had storage a lot cheaper than that, but I'll look it up.
I'm sure it's probably dropped substantially since I last seen that number, but yeah, it was me, Sally.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'll certainly include any resources that you all think of after the fact as well. Just feel free to send them to me and I will include them in that email. This is a question about kind of the scope of the testimony. So is it worth also calling for stopping the Mountain Valley Pipeline construction with regard to this moment of testifying during the Duke IRP hearing? Or would that be seen as a completely separate issue that maybe just stay away from this time?
We absolutely need to stop the MVP, and it will have an effect on Duke's energy plans. However, for this testimony, I would recommend not making the MVP a focus of your testimony, because this body will not be making those decisions at this time. You can certainly mention it as part of a larger argument, but this testimony is primarily focused on the IRP and arguments related to that. But you're absolutely right to bring it up. And the gas plants that they're proposing, if they want 13 more gas plants, that's almost certainly going to mean a lot more pipelines coming into North Carolina. And that's not what we want.
Right. Yeah, thank you for naming the connection there and also helping us think about focus. That's very helpful. Forgive me while I'm pasting more questions into my document here. So another question that was helpful is there any requirement or incentive for this commission to heed our public testimony? And is there anything else we can do here that will have an impact in addition to the testimony? I know that there are additional things we can do, so. Sure.
I'll just say that I think having a lot of people even signing up to testify is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I did listen to some public hearings that the Utilities Commission held last August and September on rate hikes and coal ash costs and so forth. And I was very impressed by them. They're 6 of the 7 actually asked questions. That's how you can, learn something about them. And they were very intelligent, knowledgeable, and I think very determined to do the best they can. So I was heartened by, watching those hearings. Certainly they'll make the decisions based on what they think is best. And again, asking during your testimony for those evidentiary hearings, which are being held in South Carolina, but not yet here, would be very helpful in getting to the bottom of, what Duke is really up to and what they're thinking.
Yeah, Joel?
Yeah, this is a shameless plug, and it's not directly related to the NCUC, but our organization, Clean Air Carolina, is involved in a petition for rulemaking at the Environmental Management Commission, which is a different regulatory body that will require the state to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And earlier, the number for, the Duke IRP carbon plus carbon policy reduction scenario was mentioned. That's around a $7 per ton cost of carbon. That was actually a number that they pulled from RGGI, because that's the current cost. $7 is around the current cost of a allowance, excuse me. And it goes up from there. But even at such a low price per ton of carbon emission, you see a significant amount of solar added to the grid, because it makes the resource much more competitive. It makes it even more competitive than natural gas. And basically, it's just, gas just isn't as affordable as it otherwise would be. So that's a way you can take action, is by reaching out to the governor's office and letting him know that you support joining RGGI.
Just add one last thing. This hearing will be covered by several media outlets. It's the one and only opportunity for customers to have a voice in how their energy is generated, and it will absolutely affect the decision of the commission. As Kathy mentioned, 6 of the 7, well, the entire commission is very receptive to public input. And just a couple of months ago, our neighbors to the south in South Carolina, the Utilities Commission down there, after hearing overwhelming public testimony, essentially forced a major change in how Dominion Energy was planning their rate cases. So we have an amazing precedent that was just set a couple of months ago, where public hearings change the outcome of a docket. And I think if we have strong participation in this one, we will see a similar result.
Thank you, Will. That's helpful, and certainly, again, register to testify, but also encourage everyone to register to testify. Make sure that we really get out and make our voices heard. I'm kind of combining 2 questions here as we start to run out of time. So one is about nuclear and one is about solar and wind. The first part is asking about the report card, and was there a reason that it didn't address the existing nuclear fleet? So that's the first question. Is that important, addressing that existing nuclear fleet? But then also, if we're pushing solar and wind, what do you all recommend on days where it is neither sunny or windy? What are your statements and the ways that you would combat those kinds of arguments?
I could say something to that. NC Warren, even though in our history we spent a lot of time being very vocally anti-nuclear, has always said we just need to not build any new nukes. So we don't like the small modular reactors that they have in their Zelfer list. But the nuclear we have is carbon free, and we need to keep that online for now to get to where we can supply ourselves just with renewables. And the question about the wind and the wind not blowing all the time and the sun not shining all the time, that is like a Duke Energy talking point. That's what they will pull out at every occasion. But storage is there, and storage is available now. The technology is available now. It's getting cheaper all the time, and it's being developed. Better technology is being developed all the time. So that's what backs up the wind when the wind's not blowing, and the solar when the sun's not shining. You put the excess power during the day when it's windy or sunny into the storage, and then you use it when you need it.
Thanks, Sally. Is Duke considering battery storage at an industrial level? That's another question we had.
Yes, they are, but not at the scale that we need them to. And Sierra Club has just submitted expert testimony that shows solar plus storage over the course of this energy plan would actually save customers over $7 billion versus building more gas plants. So it is both affordable and reliable and within Duke's reach, but they have chosen to stick with their all in on gas plan rather than pivot to battery storage, which is where everyone else is headed.
Yeah, John, do Do you remember the exact number of megawatt hours they want to add? I think it
Well,
was.
it depends, of course, on the case, but it's true. Even the second case, which is the base case, but with the carbon price added, they more than doubled their storage, and then they doubled it again in order to get the 70%. So they get to some pretty big numbers for some of those cases, but the base case, no, not much.
Yeah, it was obscenely low and just quite frankly pathetic.
But it's yeah, well, they trust gas because that's what they know, and then they're hoping for a miracle in the storage department.
To be completely cynical, they also make the most money building big things like gas plants. So Duke is always looking to maximize profits, and gas plants, they think, are the best way to make money for their shareholders.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for just a little bit of truth telling there. That's always good, and always a good way maybe to wrap up this portion. Again, we do have a couple of folks who are willing to stay on. So if you as our participants are able to stay on later for more questions, please do. But I want to make sure that we also get some resources to you. So obviously we know this is a big problem, and we know that we have a lot of strategies that we can address this with. So I want to offer those to you. Obviously, please do register. I'm dropping that link in the chat again. Register to testify. We had a question just a moment ago that said, you know, if I'm number 54 in the line, is it really going to matter? I might just say the same thing the guy before me said or the woman before me said. It's okay. We can say the same thing all night long, but if all of us say that we care and that we want a sustainable and just future, that matters. So stay in line. Even if you basically just echo the person before you, that's fine. Also, we do want you to spread the word, and we have created a social media folder for you to do that. So we have sample tweets, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, graphics to help you get as many people registered in your community before the 11th deadline. Remember, March 11th at 5 p.m. is the deadline. So do certainly try to, if you utilize social media at all, but also in your community newsletters, if you go to a congregation, a faith community, you can put that in there as well. Try to utilize that and get the word out about this event. Do check out the Duke Energy Report Card if you haven't already. You've got a lot of that information tonight, but that can again, you know, give you some fodder for thought as you put together your statement. Remember, you do not have to be an expert. You can just say that you care about your community in this world. Add your name to this petition to Duke Energy, another kind of just place to say that you care about this work. And again, know that we are going to share this recording, any resources, additional resources, and I will copy the chat to get some of these great things that you all have contributed, because I know we have a lot of collective wisdom on the call. So I'll pull that out of the chat, include that in a follow-up email as well. And we're gonna go ahead and close our time. But Kathy Buckley is our contact person also, just so you know, if you have questions about what you heard tonight. Kathy's email is in the chat. Her email is cbuckleycc@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me, programs@ncipl.org. I'm happy to connect you to anyone who you need to be connected to. And again, I will send out this recording and these resources. But we're going to close the call. And if you would like to stay on for more questions, please do that.